minutes Republican senators led by the senator from Ohio, Senator Portman, and including the senator from Wyoming, Senator Cornyn from Texas, Senator Hoeven from North Dakota, be permitted to engage in a colloquy.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. It seems as if every day there's some new action by the Obama administration which throws a big wet blanket over job creation in America. Republicans haven't been hesitant to point this out, to talk about too many taxes, too many regulations, too much debt, $4 gasoline, high tax energy prices, a health care law. Even yesterday, Senator Graham and Senator DeMint and I introduced legislation to reaffirm Section 14B of the Taft-Hartley Act to permit states, if they should so choose, to have a right to work law, creating a competitive environment in which we can create more jobs in this country. This is in reaction to an action by the National Labor Relations Board that would basically say that the Boeing company couldn't expand into a non-union state. And I ask unanimous consent to include in the record, following my remarks, an editorial in the Wall Street Journal today called "The Congress versus the NLRB."
Without objection.
But as important as it is for us to say what we don't like about the Obama administration's job policy, it's even more important for us to say what Republicans will do to create an environment to make it easier and cheaper to create private sector jobs. Senator Portman of Ohio has a strong background as a budget director, as a congressman, as a trade negotiator in the Bush administration, and a good understanding representing one of our largest and most important manufacturing states of exactly what kind of policy it takes to create an environment for job growth. He's been working for the last several weeks with Republican senators so that we could clearly say what our pro-growth job plan is. And today, with the help of other senators, we'd like to discuss that. So I ask Senator Portman, what would be the keys to a Republican plan to make it easier and cheaper to create private sector jobs?
Well, I thank my colleague from Tennessee, and I happen to have an answer to his question. Yesterday, he's correct, we did propose a jobs plan, which is a series of common sense proposals to get our economy back on track and to create jobs across our country. You will recall that a few years ago there was a stimulus effort here in the United States Congress. The President's $800 billion stimulus plan was passed, and the idea there was to get the economy back on track. There were estimates that it would have a big impact on job growth and in fact, reduce our unemployment number significantly. That didn't happen, and I think one of the reasons it didn't is because it relied too much on government providing the resources for jobs. Government doesn't create jobs, but government can create the climate for job growth. So our view is we need to take a different approach, and that approach is to stimulate private sector job growth through creating that pro-growth environment. The 7 proposals that we announced yesterday, which are part of our jobs plan, include being sure that we do indeed deal with the deficit and the debt, because that is a negative impact today on our economy. And in fact, there are economic studies out there showing that our GDP is much smaller than it would otherwise be, but for the deficit and the debt, but also to reform our tax code to make it more competitive. Economists across the spectrum agree that we can help stimulate economic growth by having a tax code that makes more sense for job creation. Certainly regulations is a major issue we'll hear about today from some of my colleagues, and being sure we have regulatory relief, particularly for small businesses who are not able to create jobs because of the increasing costs of regulations coming from Washington. And then a workforce that's more competitive requires the federal government to do a better job on workforce development. We also hear today about the need to expand exports. The President has talked about that. We are eager to get these trade opening agreements here in Congress so we can create hundreds of thousands of new jobs and create them immediately through expanding markets. We talked about energy yesterday. This is incredibly important. There are things we can do right now to get America less dependent on foreign oil and using our own resources here in this country more effectively. And then in terms of the healthcare situation, we'll talk about this in a moment. Every business person I talk to in Ohio, and I've been to over 200 factory visits now in the last couple of years, tells me that the cost of healthcare are going up, not down, and making it harder to create jobs in Ohio and across the country. So we're going to talk a little about the need for us to reduce healthcare costs. So this is a common sense 7-point plan to get the economy moving again, to create jobs. It's incredibly important to us to get the unemployment numbers down, which is way too high, to be sure American families have opportunities. It's also very important, though, in terms of dealing with the debt and deficit, because although we need to restrain spending, and Congress is beginning to take small steps in that regard, we also need to grow the economy. And when you have 1.8% economic growth, which we had in the last quarter, which is anemic, which is weak, which is not something any of us should be satisfied with, it's very difficult to create that economic growth to help deal with this huge overhang of deficits and debts. So, as the gentleman from Tennessee said, we're honored today to have some of our colleagues here with us today. We have Senator John Hoeven from North Dakota, who's come on the floor to talk a little about these issues. Also, Senator Barrasso from Wyoming is here, and Senator Cornyn has just joined us from Texas. And I would like to ask Senator Hoeven, who is a former governor of North Dakota, a state where there's actually about 3.5% unemployment, I believe, and a state that is producing domestic energy to help meet our needs, and also a big state for exports. If he would talk a little about his ideas on job growth and how it fits into this jobs plan. Senator Hoeven.
Madam President, Senator Portman, Senator Alexander, Senator Cornyn, Senator Barrasso, really great to be here this morning to engage in this colloquy. And I do want to follow up on the points that my esteemed colleague referred to, both energy and trade. They are very important in terms of job creation for our country. But if I could just start for a minute on the comprehensive nature of this jobs plan that Republicans have put together. If you look at it, you'll see it truly is comprehensive. It's about living within our means. It's about reforming our tax code without raising taxes to create a pro-growth environment, to create jobs and get our economy moving. It's about unburdening our economy from over-regulation that is hurting job creation. It's about helping to create a more competitive workforce to compete in a global economy. It's about increasing our exports. It's about a truly comprehensive approach to energy that will help us develop all of our sources of energy, both traditional and renewable, and it's about common sense healthcare reform. We need to do that because we have more than 15 million people that are unemployed. And every day they're unemployed is one day too many. And we also have to get on top of this deficit and this debt that we face. And that means controlling our spending, reducing our spending, but it also means growing our economy. That's the way to not only get people back to work, but to reduce the debt and deficit. And if you look back at the 90s, when we were in a somewhat similar situation, that's exactly what we did. And we need to go back to work and do it. In our state, North Dakota is a large energy-producing state, both traditional sources of energy, oil and gas, the clean coal technologies, but also the renewables, the biofuels and wind. But the way we did it wasn't through government spending. It was through creating a legal, tax, and regulatory environment, creating certainty so that companies and entrepreneurs could invest. They could invest in energy and advanced manufacturing and technology-based business, the whole gamut. But there are hundreds of millions to billions of dollars today that would go into investments all over this country in the energy patch. Again, both traditional sources of energy and renewable sources of energy with the latest, greatest technology, more energy, more dependably, more cost-effective, with better environmental stewardship, if we just create the right environment. That's what this plan is all about, creating that right environment. By the same token, we're looking at 3 different trade agreements right now. The Korean Free Trade Agreement, Colombia, Panama. These will create more economic activity. The Korean agreement alone is expected to increase United States exports to South Korea by $10 billion a year. We're talking hundreds of thousands of jobs. We need to be working on those free trade agreements right now, today, to approve them. And so I urge our leadership, I urge the administration to work with us to get those trade agreements to the floor, that we get them approved as part of this comprehensive jobs plan. And Madam President, I want to again thank my esteemed colleagues. I certainly want to commend Senator Portman for his outstanding work on this plan, and thank all of the members of our caucus for the contributions they've made to this plan. and also, again, express our desire to go to work with our friends across the aisle on all of these provisions for the benefit of all of those who are looking for work, for the benefit of our economy, and for the important role that economic growth, along with spending restraint, will play in helping us get on top of our debt and deficit. And with that, I'd like to, Madam President, turn the colloquy back to Senator Portman for his additional remarks.
I thank my colleague from North Dakota. He made some great points regarding the need for us to use our resources here at home on energy and for us to expand exports, because that immediately creates jobs in this country. He's done it. As a governor, he rolled up his sleeves and got directly involved in economic development. He knows what it takes. And the fact that he's been a champion for this plan and helped put it together gives me confidence that this is going to work. And we need to work, as he said, on a bipartisan basis. We're reaching out to our colleagues on the other side of the aisle and to the administration. So much of this is just common sense, things we should do now. We're also joined by our colleague from Wyoming. He's Wyoming's doctor. He is also a leader here in the Senate and has taken the lead on a number of issues related to jobs, two of which are part of the jobs plan here. One is, of course, the regulatory front, where he has taken the time to really dig into how these regulations affect business growth. And he may have some comments on that today, and I'd love to hear yours on that, Dr. Barrasso, but also on the healthcare front, where as a doctor, he's looked into what the impact will be of the healthcare reform on jobs. And this is something that perhaps doesn't get talked about enough. Unless we figure out a way to get our healthcare costs under control, it'll be harder and harder for us to create opportunity here in this country, because the costs that are embedded in hiring a new employee under healthcare alone are so high that many companies simply aren't hiring. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Dr. Barrasso.
Well, thank you very much. And Madam President, I just want to thank Senator Portman for the incredible job he's been doing as a champion of efforts to create more private sector jobs in this country, to make it easier and cheaper to create private sector jobs, for the private sector to create the jobs that we need. And Senator Portman has shown significant leadership in his campaign for the Senate last year in Ohio, developing the Portman Jobs Plan. And he went to factories and small businesses, because he knows, all across the state of Ohio, because he knows that small businesses are the engines that drive the economy. 70% of the jobs created in this country are created by our small businesses, one at a time. And when there are government rules and regulation and red tape and increased expenses, it makes it much, much harder, because it doesn't provide the certainty that the small businesses of this country need in order to create those new jobs. They may not be willing to take the additional risk and the additional expense because of the unknown concerns. And I think that is one of the things that's highlighted in this wonderful plan that Senator Portman has put together along with the members of the Republican Party. A big part of this has to do with the rules and regulations that come out of Washington, D.C. Rules and regulations that may not even be connected to laws that were passed in this body, but rules and regulations put forward by this administration, by people who have a different view of how America works. So I was encouraged over 100 days ago when the president said he had an executive order that would try to eliminate some of the red tape. Well, here we are, 100 days later, and it's just another broken promise from this administration. The red tape continues to hold American small businesses hostage. We're trying to cut through that red tape. And you know, the American people realize it. The administration may not realize it, but the American people realize it. When the American people were questioned just this last month, are there too few regulations or too many regulations and the impact on business? A majority said there are too many regulations on our businesses. And how much money does Washington spend on regulations? Well, I'll tell you, Madam President, government spent a record of $55 billion developing and enforcing rules last year. $55 billion developing and enforcing rules last year. Now, that's just the spending of government. What is the impact on our businesses around the country? Well, for every $1 that government spends to put forth and enforce these rules, it costs businesses of this country $30. So over $1.5 trillion expended by businesses across the country, a drag on our economy, making it harder for them, not easier, but harder and more expensive for the private sector to create jobs. So $30 of business expense for every $1 spent in rules and regulations out of Washington. And Madam President, people are worried because it's going to get worse. There are still 224 rules in the pipeline that have been labeled as economically significant. What's an economic significant rule? Well, it's a rule that has an impact on the economy of over $100 million. 224 of them coming down the line. Is it a surprise that the unemployment rate continues so high? And it's because of the rules and regulations of this administration. Now, what do the American people believe about this? Well, over 70% of the American people believe several different things about the effect of the rules. And I'll tell you what they are. This is polling just last month. They will tell you that additional environmental regulation increases the price of energy for things like gasoline and electricity. The rules coming out of Washington, 70% of Americans believe increases the cost of things like gasoline and electricity, the energy issues. How much is the pain at the pump costing the American family this year? Well, about $800 per family this year, higher gasoline rates than last year. Well, if you're a family, that has an impact on your quality of life. It has an impact if you're trying to deal with bills and kids and a mortgage. But there are a lot of regulations out there. So the American people see this. Also, over 70% of the American people know in their hearts and believe that small businesses, the job creators of this country, small businesses are impacted much more than the large businesses of the country. But it's the small businesses that we want to help. The other thing that more than 70% of the American people believe, is in a poll by the Terrence Group, if regulations make it too expensive to keep jobs in America, businesses will continue to move overseas. Businesses will continue to move overseas. There is so much uncertainty with the rules and regulations coming out of this town that it is paralyzing the rest of our country. And that's just on the rules and regulations aspect that people can see. There are so many rules and regulations that are still coming. One came out, I was at a hospital in Cody, Wyoming, talking about health care, because I've practiced medicine for 25 years, taking care of families all across the Cowboy State. Visiting at a hospital in Cody, Wyoming, and they're saying, you know, we're trying to figure out this one aspect of the health care law called accountable care organizations. It's 6 pages of the law, you know, that 2,700-page law that was crammed through in the middle of the night. Americans were saying, no, we don't want this. Well, the people that do the regulations, they took 6 pages of the law, and they came up with over 400 pages of regulations. They just came out about a month ago, and the hospital administrator said, you know, we're having to take money away from patient care, from helping with nurses and therapists, to pay for consultants to try to explain these rules and regulations to us so we can abide by them. Those are the kind of regulations and rules on steroids that I continue to hear about as I traveled in the last week or so at home, visiting with people, visiting in the communities, listening to what people have to say. And the concern and the uncertainty because of what's coming out of Washington is a drag on our economy. It is preventing us from making it easier and cheaper for the private sector to create more jobs. People all across the country are concerned, Madam President, and that's why I'm so happy to be here with Senator Portman today and his efforts, his leadership on a jobs plan that is one that focuses fundamentally on the things that will get government off the back of the American people and let the American people get back to work. And so with that, Senator Portman, I want to thank you for your leadership at a time when we see a government that is borrowing too much, spending too much, and growing bigger every day. And I'm very appreciative of your efforts to get things back into control and get the decisions making out of Washington and back to the hometowns and states across the country.
Well, thank you, Dr. Barrasso, and I really appreciate the amount of time and effort you've put into this regulatory issue, and the relief that small businesses need on the regulatory front is obvious if you're out talking to businesses, and it is directly related to jobs, because we can't get the jobs back unless we reduce the cost of doing business that comes from these regulations. Madam President, I would like to ask, if I could, how much time we have left in the colloquy.
12 minutes, 7 seconds on the Republican side.
Thank you, Madam President. As I've said, we are also joined by Senator Cornyn from Texas. I'm going to ask him in a minute to say a few words about the jobs plan, and the input that he's had into it has been terrific, because he's a guy who understands, again, the importance of small business, the importance of us creating the environment here through Washington laws and regulations that helps create jobs, that it's not Washington that's going to create the jobs, but in fact it's the private sector that's going to do it. And I would ask my colleague from Texas if he'd like to say a few words about his thoughts on the jobs plan.
Madam President, I would just say to my colleague from Ohio, what a welcome idea and refocusing of us on the #1 issue in America today, which is too many Americans out of work. And of course, you saw the growth numbers for the first quarter of this year, 1.8%, hardly vigorous enough to create the kind of economic expansion and job creation that we need. And as we're dealing with the spending issue, we got to deal with growing the economy, and that's exactly what the senator from Ohio has proposed here, is a comprehensive plan to try to figure out how to get people back to work and try to get the kind of economic growth which will help us deal with this debt crisis that we're in. But I would say the one thing I would that I especially liked about the plan, although I like all of it, is the embracing of the notion of a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. Senator from Ohio has had a distinguished career not only in the House but as U.S. Trade Representative and also as Director of the Office of Management and Budget. You know the budget numbers and the intricacies of that better than just about anybody here. And you know that the difficulty we've had, whether Republican administrations or Democratic administrations, of living within our means. And now that we're spending so much money that we don't have, about 40 cents on every dollar, with $14.3 trillion in debt and huge deficits, we got to figure a way out of that. And I think the best way to do that is to put this proverbial straitjacket on Congress and force us to do what every family and every business and 49 states do, either because of constitutional or statutory provisions. So I just want to say in conclusion how much I appreciate the good work he's done. He's been here, Senator Portman's been here a short time, but brings a lot of experience and a lot of wisdom on these issues, and particularly on getting America back to work. Thank you.
I thank my colleague from Texas, and he's absolutely right. When you look at the budget deficit and the debt and the impact it's having on our economy today, it is clear that we need constraints here. 49 states have a balanced budget requirement. When I'm back home talking to our cities and counties and their struggles with balancing their own budgets, they ask me, well, how can Washington continue to spend so much money they don't have? 40 cents of every dollar that Washington spends today is borrowed money. So clearly that restraint is needed, and it's important to get the economy back on track. Often we talk about the record budget deficit and the $14 trillion debt in terms of its impact on future generations. And as the father of three, I'm very concerned about that, as we all should be, because we're mortgaging their future, in essence. Excessive spending today that they're going to have to pay back. But it's not just about what's going to happen in the future. Our deficit and debts have gotten so big that they have an impact on today's economy. There's a study done recently by a couple respected economists, Rogoff and Reinhardt, saying that in looking around the world, where a country's debt is up to 90% of its total economy, you have about a 1% decline in the GDP, or the growth in the economy. Well, our growth was only 1.8% last quarter. That means it should have been at least 2.8%, but for our debt and deficit, because now our gross debt is 100% of our economy. So we're over that 90% threshold, and we're impacting our economy today. Also, you think about it, with all the government borrowing out there, it's crowding out private borrowing. And so there are fewer jobs being created in America because the government is playing a bigger and bigger role, crowding out the ability for small businesses to get a loan. I also join a lot of other folks in this chamber on both sides of the aisle in my deep concern about the possibility of a debt crisis if we don't deal with these historic deficits and debts. And that could send our economy into a tailspin, with sky-high interest rates, with inflation that's already rearing its ugly head again in this country. So we need to address this issue both because it's the right thing to do, future generations, it's really a moral issue, but also because it does impact what's going on today in our economy. And our ability to get this economy back on track and create jobs is so important to American families. And as I said earlier, so important to us dealing with the fiscal problems, because we've got to both restrain spending and grow the economy, increase economic activity, which will increase revenues. Madam Chair, I'd like to ask if you could give me a 5-minute warning when we have 5 minutes left in the colloquy today. And with that, I'd like to turn back to my colleague from Tennessee, who started us off this morning talking about the importance of this jobs plan. And Senator, would you have some more comments on the plan and on what has been said by some of our other colleagues?
Well, thank you very much. And just to the Madam President, of the 5-minute warning is for the end of 25 minutes because I intend to take 5 minutes after that.
There's 6 minutes remaining in total on the Republican side.
Then I'll take 1 minute and we'll conclude the colloquy with that. I want to thank Senator Portman, Senator Cornyn, Senator Barrasso for this. We'll be hearing often from Republicans who want to make clear what we're for as well as what we're against. And I thank the senator from Ohio for his leadership, and I wonder if in the last 30 seconds or so he wanted to reflect especially on trade and jobs, which has been his specialty.
That'd be great. Well, first of all, I thank my colleague from Tennessee for helping to promote this idea. And again, we're looking to reach out to Democrats in this chamber, in the House, working with the administration to actually get this done. We need to get the American economy back on track. And as I just heard you talk about trade. We talked about that earlier, but as was said earlier, we need to increase exports because exports equals jobs. And if you look at these 3 pending trade agreements that the administration has yet to send up to the United States Congress, and we can't move unless they do that, they would create alone between 250 and 380,000 jobs, depending on what numbers you look at. Think about that. Hundreds of thousands of jobs are ready to be created right now by knocking down barriers to our workers, our farmers, our service providers, just in these 3 instances alone. We also need to provide the President with the authority to knock down more barriers by giving him trade promotion authority. So I call on the administration today, send us those agreements, free those agreements up, allow us here in America to be able to create more jobs by expanding our exports, by leveling this playing field between these 3 countries, Panama, Korea, Colombia, and then let's get busy on having the United States even more engaged in international trade, expanding exports, and therefore creating jobs. Let me just review quickly these 7 core areas and then turn it back to my colleague from Tennessee. We do need to focus on the fiscal situation, as we talked about, to be able to help the economy. Our tax code needs to be reformed to create economic growth. We can do that. We know that there is a way to do it without raising taxes by reforming the code and making it more pro-growth. The regulations we talked about that are stifling so many small businesses in this country. The competitive workforce, retraining is critical. We can do a much better job taking the existing federal resources and directing them toward retraining for jobs that are actually there. Expanding exports we just talked about, and of course powering America's economy by using more of our own domestic resources, renewable, but also our traditional uses of energy. And finally, getting health care costs down, as Dr. Barrasso talked about that. If we do these things, we will create more hope and opportunity at a time when it's desperately needed, and we should be able to do it because they're common sense ideas. Thank my colleague from Tennessee.
Thank the senator from Ohio. Madam President, we have a vote at noon. I know there are a number of senators who wish to speak. I'm going to take about 5 minutes. I suspect Senator Cornyn wants to speak. I know Senator Grassley wants to speak. I see Senator Reid. Mr. President, the Senate is a body of precedent.